the one story that I always come back to, and that is front and center of my mind in that experience, is being detained in Uzbekistan as a suspected drug trafficker. Uzbekistan at that time, very, very strict authoritarian regime. It was the second most restrictive country behind North Korea. And I've been warned, traveling through Central Asia, the Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, I've been warned by people, just be careful in Uzbekistan. At this point, I was 2 months deep. I'd already had lots of other crazy incidents. I've been interrogated numerous times in China, almost hit by an avalanche in Kazakhstan, stuck in a landmine jungle in Laos. And so, I thought, well, nothing can stop me now, surely. Went to cross into Uzbekistan, told that I was a drug trafficker, hauled away for a 4-hour interrogation, which it went on till midnight. Step one of trying to gain control over this crazy situation is I want to speak to the embassy. I want to speak to the British embassy, get some assistance here. Spent the night there at the border post. Next morning, they said, okay, here's the phone. You got 3 minutes, one phone call, go ahead. So I phoned the British embassy. This was late March 2016. And as the phone was picked up, I just received this message saying, hello, it's Good Friday. The British embassy will be closed until next Tuesday. Goodbye. And so there I was, just completely back to square one.
Ollie, how are things?
Fergus, really good, thank you. Yeah, pleasure to join you.
Pleasure to have you. I think the first question, whenever I speak to somebody like yourself, is what drew you to such big, hairy, scary adventures?
Yeah, it's always hard to pinpoint these things, and often it's not one catalyst. But I think back to a young age, and I always tended to be the one. Although I never knew adventure could be a career, never knew it's what I would do, but I always tended to be the one who was kind of dragging people along on these silly schemes, whatever it might have been. And so I think there was an element there that I enjoyed taking risks from a young age. I was the one climbing trees and falling out of them, and I was the one coming up with these silly schemes. And I think as I got a little older, that just manifested itself in this need to just push things to the next level, really experiment with what I'm comfortable with. And for me, that was heading out into the big wide world on expeditions and adventures.
So, growing up, were you often finding yourself in sticky situations outdoors? Were you sneaking out to go and get up some hills? Were your parents encouraging of all sports that you attempted? What was childhood like for you that sort of really cultivated this? Because we all have big dreams when we're younger, don't
Mm.
we? We all sort of see these mountains, these hills, these otherworldly parts of side of the world that we've never even known to exist.
Hmm.
Yet so few of us actually then go on to make that something that we achieve within our lifetime. But you've done that and more. So, what was it about your childhood that gave you the confidence ultimately to move into this as a career?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the place I grew up in Wigan, it's a working class rugby league town in Northern England, and actually, it couldn't be further from being an adventurous place of any kind. But I think
Pie Barnes and P West is pretty
that
adventurous
that
in
is
my
top
book.
quality nutrition right there, isn't it? Yeah, but it's funny. So I grew up playing rugby league and football, and just absolutely loved that. But I was spending as much time as I possibly could out with my mates, out on the local fields, local football pitches, local forests. And I remember one particular moment in the summer, and it almost feels like one of these little whimsical outdoors novels you might read these days, about we were out there in the woods trying to build this shelter, and I'd sort of snuck a load of tools out of the garage, including axes and saws and things. We must have been 13, 14 at the time. We were going to build this big shelter, which was kind of where we were going to hang out for the summer. And 1 hour into this tree building effort, I managed to slice my leg open with an axe and ended up in A&E. And it took me about 5 years to tell my parents the truth about that one. But yeah, it was little misadventures like that, being outdoors as much as possible, and actually spent a lot of my childhood kind of staring at this map on my wall, growing up in this fairly ordinary town, but actually wanting to get out into the big wide world as soon as I possibly could.
So, how did that manifest? What actually drove you? What was the process to expedition number one?
Yeah, so I as I said, played football and rugby league at school, never considered this. But at the age of 16, 17, I went on this outward bound weekend for the first time. We went rock climbing, never done it before. I was up in the Lake District and just instantly loved the sense of adrenaline, the sense of being out there. And actually, off this single experience, decided to sign up to an outdoor leadership degree, which is, yeah, believe it or not, an actual degree. And actually, that turned out to be an amazing decision. And for the next 3 years, I spent, my time with people who were like-minded, with amazing instructors. We learned about all things mountain biking, rock climbing, kayaking, canoeing, and they really encouraged us to travel as much as we could. And so the first solo trip for me was at the age of 19. Went out to Morocco for a couple of weeks on my own. Big solo. Well, no, I was working with, or sort of trekking with, local people, so it wasn't entirely solo. But out there in the Atlas Mountains, and at that point in time, the Atlas Mountains, they were very, very underdeveloped. So we were going through villages with no, no real infrastructure. I'd learnt a little bit of Arabic, spent some of my uni years learning Arabic. And so there I was, out gazing up at the stars, trekking through mountains, living in mud huts for 2 weeks, and completely cut off from the outside world. And I just got back from this experience and just thought, yeah, there's something magical about this experience. I want more of that.
What at its core was it scratching for you? Was it just an overwhelming sense of fulfillment? Was it the awe that came with such wild and incredible environments that were very different to growing up in Wigan? I can imagine growing up anywhere in the UK, in fact.
Yeah.
But if you were to really dilute down what it is that draws you to these environments, could you put a finger on it?
Something just occurred to me as you were asking that question, which I'd never really considered before. But all throughout my childhood, I never really enjoyed being told no. I didn't like having restrictions imposed on me. And so there was something just incredibly liberating, incredibly freeing, particularly about the mountain environment. It's just so vast, so expansive. Nobody's going to tell me no if I go and climb up a rock face. Nobody's going to tell me no if, it's sort of on me. And there's also, that comes with, I suppose that comes with limitations in a way. You are responsible for yourself. And if you get yourself in bad situations, then you've got to get yourself back out of it. So, freedom in a sense is a two-way street, but it was really that sense of freedom which I enjoyed. And actually the solo travel, I think that was a special component in it. In that I've traveled lots with teams, and I guide teams and travel with friends and all kinds of different combinations. But when you are out there on your own, having that self-reliance and just being open to the opportunities that the world presents with you, I think that is a really magical part of solo travel in particular. And I'm glad that I did that in my early years, because it just really helped to develop me as a person, I think, and set me up for what I've then done later life.
So you had that taste for blood from your first expedition, and what happened next? Because so much has happened next, and so much is about to happen. But one of the things that I think, in terms of sort of treading the path least trodden, is climbing the highest peak in Iraq in 2018, which is not something that you conventionally hear people talking about as much. It's obviously not as popular as climbing the highest peak in Africa, let's say, as that is a path quite well trodden at this point.
Yeah.
And you're going there very soon. But what was it about that expedition that you focused on? What were the lessons you learned along the way that has essentially given you the expertise that you now have?
Good question. I mean, so that was a few years into the career, as it were. But climbing the highest mountain in Iraq was, yeah, that was kind of a big one in many respects. It was a bold idea, and to add a bit of context here, at the time I was doing a lot of work guiding people through the likes of Syria, Somalia, Yemen, Congo, really kind of testing the limits of what is possible, where it's possible to travel to, and working with people from all kinds of really interesting backgrounds. And I got together with a couple of colleagues at the time, and we wanted to set up something really, really bold. And I had this brainwave. Well, I knew I was going to Iraq, and so just doing a bit of research, heard about the highest mountain in the country, and thought, you know what, that sounds like a proper adventure. And it's located up on the Iranian border, very sensitive part of the country. The mountain itself is surrounded by landmines, which were left in the 80s by Saddam Hussein. It is very hard to get to. You need to go through a lot of checkpoints to get there. And, as far as my research told me, only a tiny number of outsiders had actually ever been to this mountain. And it's a 3,600 meter mountain. We wanted to climb it in winter. It is full winter conditions, sort of think brutal Scottish winter conditions. So it was really pushing the limits. And then, you factor in actually taking a group out there, making sure they're safe, thinking about all the safety considerations. The margins are pretty thin. So when I did that, and I did have quite a bit of experience at this point, I knew that I could not take any chances when it came to the level of risk. So I went out there on my own 2018, found myself local, good, really solid local contact. Turned out to be probably the most experienced mountain guide in Iraq. Linked up with him, stayed in his house. We spent a few days on the mountain, recce'd the route, dodged the minefields, made it to the summit. Happy days. Then it was a case of actually rolling it out and putting it to the general public and seeing if we could put a small expedition together. Did people have the appetite for something like this that was really at the limits of what is sort of available on the market in terms of adventurous experiences? And believe it or not, we got a small team together, a small team of international trekkers, and flew out there the following year to go and climb the mountain. And it turned out to be a really interesting process, and certainly from a leadership point of view, probably one of the most interesting moments that I've experienced when it comes to decision making in particular. And we were on this mountain, and I knew the mountain well. I'd studied it, learned everything I knew about the mountain. I recce'd it the year before, knew the routes, knew the dangers, and so there we are, 4 days into the trek. We'd been camping our way up the mountain, hauling all of our supplies. I mean, there's no porters, no assistance whatsoever, so each person was carrying sort of 15-20 kilo packs. We had our local guide. I was doing the navigating, and then we were parked at the final camp before the summit. And I talk about this because I think this is an important story to share. And I knew that the last ascent up to the summit was 500-meter snow slope, essentially surrounded by cliffs on either side, and it is perfect avalanche terrain. It's about 35 degrees. It is sort of perfect avalanche terrain in every way. And so for you to climb that mountain or that section of the slope and get to the summit, the snow conditions needed to be absolutely perfect. And what I'd observed in the days building up to it, of course, there's no weather forecast, there's no avalanche forecasts out there, so I was figuring it all out myself. I was digging snow pits in the snow, really trying to understand the snow conditions, explaining it to the team as I went along. And what I found essentially was really worrying. And it was, what we had on the surface was what we call rock solid wind slab. So it's wind blown snow, it's rock hard, and underneath that sort of a thin layer of what they call grauple, which is almost like tiny ball bearings. And so essentially it's like having granite on top of ball bearings. And if you break that granite at a steep angle, you can imagine the consequences. It would be thousands of tons of snow sliding down the mountain. So, I just remember this distinct moment when I was lying in my sleeping bag, 3,000 meters, halfway up the highest mountain in Iraq. I've got a team full of people who've flown here from around the world with this great expectation of reaching the mountaintop. And, for one of the few times in my life, it really felt like I had the lives of those people resting on my shoulders. And, this is the severity of some of these expeditions, and particularly in a leadership capacity. People are entrusting their lives in you. And so, I had to make a decision that next morning, and we set off to go and have a look, as I like to say. And we got to the base of this steep snow slope, dug more avalanche pits. It looked as terrible as ever. And actually, I turned the group around, and we decided not to go for it. I decided that we shouldn't go for it. And so yeah, that was an interesting process to go through. And I look back at that decision. It's a decision I've thought about a lot. I've talked about it a lot to other mountain guides. And I do believe it's probably one of the best decisions I've ever made. um in a place like that, you simply cannot afford to yeah, you can't afford to take huge risks with when the safety margins are so slim. The possibilities of rescue are so slim. You really are out there on your own. And so I did learn a lesson from that. And I think the lesson I learned is, from a leadership point of view, is actually explaining to people as I was going along, bringing them inside of my decision making process. That was really powerful, so that by the time I made the decision, they knew what that decision was going to be. And by really tapping into the team, and sort of using them throughout that process of climbing the mountain, when I did make that decision and we came back down the mountain, though there was that disappointment, each one of those people made a commitment and a decision to come back and do more expeditions with me in the future. And
At what point did you classify yourself as a leader? Because obviously you can receive mountain leader qualifications, you can tick the box, but being confident in leading a team and backing your ability and not allowing the voices of your left and your right to penetrate your steadfast decision making. At what point in your career did you decide in your own mind that you were the leader that you believed yourself to be? Because in such high pressure situations, you need to be that person. You need to have total unfaltering faith in your decision making. And that is something that is a skill, that is an experience that will be developed. And as you've said, it can only come from a place of authenticity and exposure to the demands of those high pressure situations. So in the years that came between your degree and that expedition, what was it that made you a leader in its truest sense?
yeah, so when it comes to what had really readied me for that decision making process, I've got to rewind a little bit. And 2012, finished uni, finished outdoor leadership degree, and went out traveling for a year. Got back home, and by this point, I'd spent a lot of my years. Yeah, I spent a month in Beirut in Lebanon. I'd spent a month in Uganda. I'd worked in Australia, America. I'd really been here, there, and everywhere, and kind of pushing things bit by bit in each time. But I arrived back home in 2013 and just fell into this job, actually working as a kitchen salesman. First in design, then in kitchen sales. And I've got to say, like, I just absolutely hated that job. It was one of those, I got back, I checked the bank balance and decided to get this job. It had the company car, it had the laptop, phone, all these other perks, but it was just completely unfulfilling to me. And I was there for quite a while, actually. And although I didn't have very much success, I decided to quit that job in 2015 and really get back to what I wanted to do. And that, of course, was embarking in this world of adventure. And so 2015, quit the job. Absolutely terrible timing. We were due to get married to our wife in a few months. We just bought a house. We were undergoing a major house renovation. And of course, from that moment forward, I would have no income whatsoever. And, I decided to quit this job and become an adventurer. And being an adventurer is sometimes just a fancy way of saying that you're unemployed. But anyway, quit the job. And my goal back then was to do something really big. I thought, if I want to kickstart this line of work, I really need to go big. And so I decided, my plan was to travel from Hong Kong to Istanbul, right across the mountainous spine of Asia, climbing mountains in every country in the middle of winter on my own. and that's what I set out to do in early 2016. And I pulled out all the stops to make this happen in terms of trying to get funding on board, trying to get free kit, trying to run a Kickstarter, partnering with various local media stations, things like that, and eventually got to the start line of this journey, and that really became, yeah, the most transformative experience of my life to date. um, and it turned into this 4 month just epic journey, through 11 countries, climbed 14 mountains, had all kinds of crazy, harrowing experiences along the way. Some of which I can share if you like. And
What sticks out the most? What was the what was the memory that is most front of mind when you reflect on that 4 month period?
I want to give a dose of the good. There were great things that happened. I had celebrated various New Year's festivals, went to a big Tibetan festival, um, made loads and loads of friends, just had lots of good times, reached lots of summits, in difficult situations. But really, the one story that I always come back to, and that is front and center of my mind in that experience, is being detained in Uzbekistan as, as a suspected drug trafficker. And that was, yeah, that was an interesting challenge, to say the least. So to give a little bit of context on that one. So Uzbekistan at that time, very, very strict authoritarian regime, known as the second most restrictive country behind North Korea in terms of the freedoms of its people, police state. And I've been warned, traveling through Central Asia, the Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, I've been warned by people, just be careful in Uzbekistan. And as I went across the border late at night from Tajikistan, that's where everything changed. At this point, I was 2 months deep, into the 2.5 months deep. I'd already had lots of other crazy, crazy incidents. I've been interrogated numerous times in China, almost hit by an avalanche in Kazakhstan, stuck in a landmine jungle in Laos. And so, I thought, well, nothing can stop me now, surely. But yeah, went to cross into Uzbekistan, and immediately as I crossed the border, my bag was taken from me. Every item was taken out, full bag search. They wanted my phone, laptop, camera, searched through all the files, documents I had, full body search. By the end of this, they found in my first aid kit some cocodamol tablets, which I was taking for a knee problem at the time. Unbeknown to me, they're classified as an illegal narcotic in Uzbekistan and many other countries, it turns out, because it contains opium derived from heroin, just north of Afghanistan, which produces 95% of the world's heroin. So this is like drug central. It turns out the majority of drugs trafficking heads up through Central Asia into Russia and out across the world. So they are very, very hot on it. And as soon as they found that, yeah, I was effectively collared and yeah, told that I was a drug trafficker. Hauled away for a 4 hour interrogation, which it went on till midnight. And yeah, at the end of this, I've been photographed, very sort of brutally interrogated, and then I was presented with these papers all written in Russian. And I looked at these things, having no idea what they said. They barely spoke English. I knew a tiny few words in Russian, and they said, "Look, we want you to sign these papers, and it'll be a lot better for you." And I'm looking at these things, just thinking, "There's no way I'm going to sign these papers." What I want to do, and this was, step one of trying to gain control over this crazy situation, is I want to speak to the embassy. I want to speak to the British embassy, get some assistance here. I knew that I had a right to speak to the embassy. So spent the night there at the border post. Next morning, they said, okay, here's the phone. You got 3 minutes, one phone call, go ahead. So I phoned the British embassy. This was late March 2016. And as the phone was picked up, I just received this message saying, "Hello, it's Good Friday. The British Embassy will be closed until next Tuesday. Goodbye." And so there I was, just completely back to square one. No phone signal, no Wi-Fi, no way of contacting the outside world effectively. And so I was completely on my own in that situation. And these thoughts are going through my head of just being, yeah, spending a long time in some rotten Uzbek jail. Um, and Yeah, I mean, what happened next was they took me down to Termez, which is a city on the Afghan border. They took blood samples, urine samples, seeing if I still had this drug in my system. They gave me a lawyer, an interpreter, and ultimately the options were my palette of options were 30 days in jail or a $500 fine. Well, in fact, they said $1,000. I negotiated that down. And for anyone wondering, is this just a backhander? No, the chance of a backhander had long since gone, and I'd sort of subtly explored that option at the border, and it was it was not taken advantage of by them. So this was like through the courts. And so yeah, the issue I had, actually, I couldn't get my hands on the $500. I had few, some dollars in cash, but they didn't accept Visa or MasterCard in Uzbekistan. So it meant an awkward phone call back home. They let me use the phone one more time. My dad transferred, Western Union transferred some cash. Took me a few days to get it. Meanwhile, I'm being held under house arrest in this grimy hotel. I've got, yeah, very suspicious, shifty characters coming in plain clothes who are asking all kinds of questions, being generally very hostile. And ultimately, I got my hands on this cash and we transferred it into Uzbek money. And the funny thing is, like in Uzbekistan, the currency, the smallest the biggest denomination is worth about 20p. So $500 worth is literally a bag full of cash. So I was then driven with literally a carrier bag full of cash out to what turned out to be an ex-KGB compound on the outskirts of the city, on the Afghan border. And it was just this mad situation. And they sent me in there, and it took them ages to count all this money. Very, very, everyone's very, very serious. It's no fun and games in there for sure. And got out of there eventually. Was given my passport back, and the guy said to me, "Okay, yeah, you can leave the country. You can leave Uzbekistan and go back home." This is the first he'd mentioned of that, and I'm thinking to myself, well, I've been traveling 2.5 months. I've got through all these hardships. I do not intend to go home. Like, I'm only halfway through. There's no way I'm going home right now. And so, yeah, I decided to take a risk at that point, and I'd made friends with the interpreter. That was, he was the one person I kind of latched onto as a possible ally in the situation, having no contact with the outside world. And so I got in the taxi with him. He was meant to take me to the airport. He was under strict orders, but I had a quiet word with him and said, "Look, I don't want to go to the airport. I want to go to the mountains. I want to go and climb a mountain in Uzbekistan and then carry on my journey." I told him all about it, and he decided to help me out. So yeah, was in a taxi off up into the mountains, and I thought, right, okay, priority number one, I need to tell my family that I'm not banged up in some Uzbek jail here. So searched around the town looking for phone signal, looking for Wi-Fi. Yeah, nothing of the kind. Bumped into this tough group of local boxers, black eyes, gold teeth, and they said to me, "Look, they spoke a bit of English. They said there's no phone signal out here. There's no contact with the outside world, but we'll look after you." And I thought, well, they look like trustworthy guys, so I'll go along with them. But it turned out to be really, I mean, quite interesting because they owned a bar in the city, in the village. Took me for a few beers. We went for a drive around the village and up to a viewpoint. And but a couple of instances in that night, I noticed. Well, in fact, I was approached by police officers on two occasions, and actually pulled out the bar. And later at the viewpoint, the police officer came, thorough questioning, papers taken, all the rest of it. Next day, went and climbed a mountain, came back down late at night. Been a long, like 14 hours on the mountain, and as I got back to my where I was staying, this little hotel, approached, and there the police officer was spying through my bedroom window. I thought, okay, I'm being watched here. They're fully just onto me, and so I thought, right, I need to get the hell out of this place. And yeah, I'd never before experienced anything like that, where just this deep sense of paranoia was just swimming through my system.
the reality of that situation is totally unfathomable to people that haven't experienced or seen that reality exist. I can imagine, because hearing you talk about such an authoritarian regime doesn't seem real in many ways. And going from selling kitchens to being interrogated by Uzbek
Mm.
police and detained for a period of time, you've got to laugh at the Good Friday
Yeah.
situation. I'm sure you can. I'm sure you can upon reflection. But at the time, you must have been cursing the universe and everything within it. But you didn't have any choice but to learn
Mm.
there, did you? Because you were completely powerless to the situation. Did you feel the panic subside and a desire for practicality and sort of pragmatism set in? Or did you feel well equipped to handle the pressure of the situation, knowing the risks, having mapped out the expedition? Because you can plan and plan and plan on paper, but you can only gain experience in things like this once you're in the arena, as it were. And you can't be in the arena of negotiating with people that don't speak the language at a border station in an authoritarian regime with a KGB compound not far away. That's not a situation you learn at primary school.
Mm-hmm.
So, from a personal point of view, from a character point of view, from a leadership point of view, from a personal faith in your ability to navigate the situation and actually have faith that the situation would come to an end and you'd come out the other side, how did that arc evolve for you personally?
I think having those earlier experiences of travel through, yeah, through more hostile parts of the world, and I think back to back to the age of 20, and I think when I was in Uzbekistan I was about 25, so that was 5 years on, and at the age of 20 I was out in Beirut living with a local family. There were explosions going off a mile away. Bumped into guys with handguns on the street. Um, I was watching a guy out my window with a rifle, and so that was there were lots of experiences which I think had kind of readied me for that situation. And then even on that Asia trip, being interrogated in China, having a lot of hard questions thrown at me, and just navigating very hard to reach corners of the world on my own, day to day. It's like a multitude of communications that you're having every single day just to keep on moving forward, because very often nothing is easy. Even just simple thing of getting from A to B. You want to get from A to B in Kyrgyzstan, you got to have like a negotiation with 30 men who are all trying to like pull your arm off, because that's the negotiation tactic. They grip hold of your hand, and you keep a fierce grip on each other's hand until the price is settled. Meanwhile, you've got a mob of 20 guys watching the whole thing going on. So, there's all these little things that are going on. And I think, a big part of it, when you are solo and you're coming across some hostility like that, and I don't want to make out that it's all like that. 99% of my experiences were great. But when you do encounter those negative situations, you're on your own. There is literally, or there was for me, and perhaps that's because of my previous experiences, this instinct to just, right, if nobody else is gonna stand up for me, I need to stand up for myself, and I need to fight just as hard as they are, for myself. And that was the instinct, because there is nobody to turn to, there's nobody to call. Only one person can get you out of that situation, and it's yourself. And so you've kind of just got to take responsibility. I'd made error in my planning. I hadn't realized that cocodamol was illegal there. And you think about it, it's probably milligrams of heroin which have stumped me and caused this entire situation. And and to come back to your other point that you mentioned there was certainly an element of me when I was deep into it. There was certainly an element, and I was just kind of going with, going through this process as much as I could, trying to grab elements of control where I could. But there was definitely a thought going through my head, which was, damn, this is going to make a good story when it's over.
And that it does.
So,
That it does. So coming out of the back end of that, you had about what 3,000 miles or so to
yeah.
go on an 8,000-mile journey. Did you have a spring in your step, feeling that you'd overcome the biggest obstacle, or was there a palpable fear lingering that, oh my goodness, I maybe underestimated the severity of this quote-unquote adventure? Because it wasn't long ago that you were selling
Mm,
kitchens on the road, and I keep coming back to that because you went big on round
yeah.
one, but the experience of building the wings as you fly is a very valuable one. But this was building the wings as you fly on a 5 foot drop. You didn't have long to build them,
No.
and the stakes were high. So what was the emotion? What was the anticipation of the future for the remaining miles after that experience? Because it sounds like there'd been a steady build of, right, okay, accounting for culture, accounting for tradition, accounting for the difficulties of each individual state, but you then peaked.
Yeah.
Or was there a fear that you hadn't yet peaked and maybe, oh, I've underestimated the reality of the situation here?
There was definitely a thought that anything could happen. Anything could happen. You know, every single day, anything could happen. And weird and wonderful things did happen every day. So, you know, I was under no illusions that the hardest bit was over. And actually, you know, as I got out of that village, you know, it ended up being this crazy sort of rat race across the country. I changed taxis in every town, traveled for 500 miles, sheltered in some local's house, managed to get an overnight train into Kazakhstan. You know, that was a crazy experience in itself, while just carrying this weight of paranoia, just to get the hell out of that country. And so, yeah, you know, it's kind of a good I think that journey turned into kind of a good metaphor for life, which is that when you have a goal, and for me, I started off in Hong Kong. My goal was Istanbul. It was 8,000 miles away, and all of the possibilities between me and the end point were sort of infinite. Anything could happen. But the one thing I could control was my daily perpetual motion, moving bit by bit further west until I reached my endpoint, and just trying to evade and deal with the problems that come up. And, you know, you think about any goal in life, and it's so often a similar journey, isn't it? You know what the destination is often. You've got this goal in mind, but really we have very little control sometimes about what's going to happen between then and the end. And what counts, of course, is how you deal with it and how you get over those situations. But you're absolutely right that I came into this as a failed kitchen salesman. But I think that, in a sense, was my biggest motivation. Who the hell was going to hire me as a failed kitchen salesman? Nobody. So if I didn't make this thing a success, what prospects did I have? If I didn't make this thing a success, how was I going to build a career to fund this house renovation, to pay for this wedding which I was building towards? Like, everything depended on this expedition being a success. So, that's the context. I've never felt such a deep sense of motivation. And so that's why when this guy slapped the passport back in my hand in Uzbekistan and said, "You can go home now," I looked him in the eye and said, "There's no way I am going home." And that was the depth of my motivation at that point in time.
You were so deep as well, where your worldview and your perspective and the lens in which you were viewing the world had been altered in that 2.5 months. If you'd been detained at the border, fresh out of a Sunday roast, you would have taken the flight home. But because you've covered so much, because you've come so far, because you've seen the things that you've seen, because you've experienced the things that you have, your perspective on what was left on the table had changed. So there's a cynic that would have said that the sunk cost fallacy could have applied here because you've invested so much. But Uzbekistan sent you a clear signal that actually maybe the error in planning, that's it, mate. You know what? That's cost you. You should probably get on a flight home. But then there's the optimist or the irrational optimist, we'll say, that was you, who decided, nah, let's keep going. And I completely understand from a personal point of view why you did. And I think something that we haven't focused on is the amount of beauty that you will have seen along the way, because you've covered one of the least trodden parts of the world in terms of footfall, and you will have seen things that only a handful of people in the world will have seen. So, what was the most beautiful sight that you saw? Where was it?
Great question. And yeah, like that was the overwhelming feeling from this journey, that it was a real privilege to just set eyes on places where very, very few people are going. Um, to give you a picture of probably the most evocative, powerful moment that I had on that journey, that was in Tibet. And it was towards the start of my journey. I'd maybe been traveling about a month, and I was desperate to get into Tibet. I just, I knew about the culture there. I really wanted to see it for myself. But if you, so again, it's going to get slightly political in the sense that if you want to go to Tibet, you need to get expensive permits from the Chinese state. It's very, very difficult. It can take months for these things to get processed. I'm on a budget. I'm under time pressure. So I wanted to do it my way, and my way meant sneaking into Tibet. And that was my plan of
Very, very safe and logical on the surface.
So
obviously.
it's clearly a very sensible decision. And that was my plan, and I'd figured out that there was going to be this New Year's festival in a little village called Langmusi, 4,000 meters up high, on the edge of the Tibetan plateau. Spectacular looking valley. And I wanted to be there. I really wanted to be there. I thought my trip could coincide. And for 2 weeks, I was skirting the Tibetan border, trying to get access into Tibet, and being turned away at every point. I was having police hassling me. So eventually, I met a guy. It's funny, I tend to meet into all these curious figures, but this was a guy who was writing for the Free Tibet Press, and he was actually under watch by the Chinese state. So again, thinking, okay, trustworthy guy. And he's got his passport taken off him, but he said, look, I can help you. And he smuggled me onto this bus at the crack of dawn, blizzard of -20, and off I go on this bus, trundling up the mountainside, again, past police checkpoints to eventually reach this high Tibetan village. As I reach there are hundreds of Tibetans sort of in these great big cloaks. You've got these Tibetan longhorns just booming around the valley. You've got snowstorm coming down, people running up to the hilltops, throwing these things in the air. You've got people in masks dancing around these stupas, and it was just absolutely phenomenal. It's -20. There's a blizzard going on. I'm the only Westerner there. And yeah, it was just such a powerful thing to behold, and something, it gives me goosebumps just thinking about it now. But incredible experience, and one that, I took a few risks there to make that happen. But it's so easy to just comply and just back down, but sometimes you got to be bold, and I think being bold very often pays off.
It does. I agree in many ways. I've never yet been so bold that it's completely destroyed me, as I'm still here talking, which is obviously good news. And you are in the same boat. Yeah. But yeah, there are situations you've been in that you will not meet somebody at the pub who will have the same stories to tell, and that is a fantastic reward for being bold. But it begs the question, because I get this a lot as well, whether you were ever drawn to join the military and building a career in that background, because there's obviously so much crossover with why lots of younger guys join the military, that just cosmic draw to the outdoors, the sort of lack of a desire to be told no, or a disdain for authority figures, but then conversely the military means you slot right into that, but it almost simplifies your life, whereby you know where the authority figures, where the ranking is, so it takes away any sort of confusion as to who's in charge of who, sort of thing. Was it ever a part of your thinking? Was it ever a thought that came to mind? Was it something that came up again as you became more experienced in harsh environments, or was it just something that you thought, you know what, I'd rather do this my own way?
Yeah, it's something that has kind of been swimming around my mind for probably the best part of a decade, up until a few years ago. Right from being at college, going through uni, at one point I went and was going to join the University Officers Training Corps, and then even a few years ago was looking at possibly doing some reserve stuff alongside my expeditions. I think for me, I'd found this trajectory quite early in life, and that whole kitchen salesman period, that was sort of a blip. That was a bit of an anomaly there. That certainly wasn't a part of the plan. Um, so it was something I considered a lot, and actually, I look at it now, and I've got friends who are serving and have finished serving in the military, and I know that it would have suited me well. You could train all day, you get to hang out with like-minded people, you can do all kinds of courses. Of course, there's the issue of being potentially shot, which is a bit less appealing, but that's true. Yeah, funny how things work out. Yeah, I'm sure I could have gone down that line, but I chose my own way, and I think that's kind of what I've carried on doing.
I think this is a trade, commercially speaking, is something that's probably fairly misunderstood. I think any solo outdoors focused disciplines are often very difficult to navigate commercially. Whether that's ultra running, whether that's mountaineering, whether it's adventure in general terms, short of being a TV adventurer, there isn't really an obvious way to make it a career. So, for those that are interested, for those that are curious, myself included, how have you structured things from a business and commercial point of view to be able to make this a career? And how much of that was absorbed from what others were doing and learning from other people in the industry, and how much of it was made up as you go along and figured out as you've gone through the iterations over the years?
Yeah, great question. And it's true, it is such a niche thing to do that there is really no blueprint for it. So going into this, I remember searching around like, okay, how do I actually make this into a career? And there really weren't many answers. You could look at people who were really at the top of their game, top level explorers, and see what they were doing. But of course, for a guy starting out with very little pedigree, very little background, I had to figure it all out for myself. And so over the years, it's something I've dabbled in lots of things, tried lots of things. Some have worked, some haven't. But over time, the things that have worked best, I do. So I do a lot of guiding work. I now run my own company called Wild Edge, where I guide people on expeditions, adventures all over the world. For many years, I was doing a lot of freelance work. So guided literally hundreds of people through about 30 different countries all across Asia and Africa. So that has been, a source of income. I do a lot of talks to corporate groups and businesses, sharing my experiences across the UK, in person, virtually. And more latterly, work with brands on consulting, help out with photo shoots, guiding, that sort of thing. Do a bit of modeling for outdoor brands. And just recently have partnered up with a couple of big outdoor brands. But actually, one other part of sort of my career, which I've not spoken about a ton, was the thing that got me through COVID. Actually, so March 2020, just got back from Siberia, great big trip out there, and within 2 weeks, all of my work was cancelled. I had a year full of expeditions lined up, suddenly all cancelled. So it's like, okay, what do I do now? But a couple of years before that, I'd set up another little business actually, and this was basically making and selling reclaimed wooden furniture. So yeah, getting reclaimed timber, turning it into tables, benches, shelves, that sort of thing. And it was just something to keep me ticking over a little bit in between the expeditions. March 2020, all expeditions cancelled. Within 2 weeks, that business just kind of exploded, more or less by chance. Suddenly everybody sat at home, they're staring at the coffee tables or whatever, and not spending money on travel or socializing, and so they're buying a lot of furniture. And actually in 2020, that business grew sevenfold. Got a big workshop, hired I probably hired about 7 people overall. And that just majorly got me through those couple of years, and turned out to be yeah, probably my most lucrative period in a sense.
Fantastic. So the short answer is chaos.
Chaos.
Commercially, but the longer and more nuanced answer, but which is almost very conventional in many ways, is you sort of do what needs done within the context of what's available to you to make the things work that you want to have happen.
Yeah.
It's not a case of you can stroll in and say, I would like to be an adventurer, here is my CV, Big Four consultancy firm, are you interested? No, I'm afraid not. There's not really an Indeed job description for this, is there?
No.
So it's kind of, you got to make do with what you've got, but you've got to be bullish, you've got to be bold, like you've said, to be able to get the attention from the people that haven't probably had that many propositions put their way because there isn't a really well-established commercial blueprint for how to approach these things. So it's reassuring to hear that it's chaos, because if you come out and said, I've come up with this clear formula on how I navigated being an adventurer from a commercial sense, people would be like, oh, interesting. Whereas I think it's probably reassuring to people that are sort of exploring how they can make something of adventure, exploration, that chaos is normal. Yeah. Embrace the chaos, and then
chaos
use that to your advantage when you find yourself on the Uzbek border.
Yeah.
But with that in mind, you are preparing for your biggest project yet, and I would love to hear more about the thinking that has gone into that from a long-term fulfillment point of view, because it's a big one, and knowing the way that you approach things, there'll be a lot of thought gone into where this sits in your to-do list as an individual with the life that you have available to you. And I'd love to know how you've planned for it, what it entails, what you're worried about, and ultimately when it kicks off, which is very, very soon.
So, you talked a bit about chaos there, and it's true that a lot of the early years have been very chaotic, and it is a case of doing what I possibly can. And in a sense, this next project is my way of bringing some degree of order to that chaos, in that it will be my absolute focus for the coming years. And I think whenever I've sort of excelled at anything, it is when I've given it my absolute focus, and I think that's the case for a lot of us. It's I heard this thing, which is if you have 15 priorities, you really don't have any, and so this is absolute priority number one, and the project is the Ultimate 7 project, and this is something which first came to my mind about 10 years ago. Over the last few years, I've thought about it a lot, researched it, and to a point where I think it's possible. And it's a project which it's a world first project. It's never been done before, never been attempted before. It is a multi-year endeavor. And essentially the project is this: to travel by human power from the lowest point in each continent to the highest in all 7 continents. So to give you a sense of what that would look like, it is 7 separate expeditions on all 7 continents, entirely by human power, from the lowest point by elevation to the highest. So of course finishing up with all 7 summits. And to break each of those down, it will involve around 500 days of expeditions in total across all different climates: deserts, jungles, mountains, seas. It will involve thousands of miles of human-powered endeavour, and as I say, it's never been done before. So, knowing what I know, having spent 15 years in this world of adventure, I really believe it is on the limits of what is possible physically and logistically. Those who I've spoken to, agree, who are well placed to give judgment on this kind of challenge, and so this feels like my piece de resistance. It feels like it's what I've been building towards for my entire career. And you know what? Another element of motivation here, and I've always thrived on kind of pushing the limits of what's possible, of going outside of my comfort zone. And I remember one strange realization I had last year when I was in Syria. I was guiding a team through Syria. We were in Aleppo, a city which has been bombed, completely destroyed through the Syrian civil war. Nobody's been there for 10 years. There are many dangers. And I remember sitting with the group I was guiding through there and just had this thought, which is, this feels way too comfortable. And it was a really strange realization to have in such a place, but it really did. And actually, in the build up to that trip, I'd had a stressful time at home and I had so many plates spinning and, was just frantically working towards lots of things. And I felt so tranquil in this most sort of hostile, remote, chaotic place. And I thought, well, if this doesn't feel hard enough, or if this feels too comfortable, maybe I've been playing it safe. And so, the Ultimate 7 project is me really ratcheting things up to the maximum. And yeah, I'm very, very excited about the possibilities that I believe exist with this project, which even before starting is slowly starting to show themselves.
For context, for those listening, and for myself actually, because I don't know the lowest points of the 7 continents, what are the 7 A to Bs that you need to cover?
So Africa, heading out there in 2 days for the first leg. That is Lac Assal in a little country called Djibouti. One of the hottest places on earth. It's going to be 45 to 50 degrees. Then a 1,600-mile cycle through Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, into Tanzania to climb Kilimanjaro. Asia will be Dead Sea to Everest. Dead Sea being Jordan, Israel, all the way pretty much across Asia, through some quite interesting countries, then to finish up with Everest. North America, Death Valley to Denali. Death Valley being Southern California, way up to Denali in Alaska. Only ever been done once before. South America, lowest point is a little area on a little peninsula about 1,600 miles away from Aconcagua. Notorious for its brutal winds, harsh weather conditions. Europe is politically interesting at the moment because the highest and lowest points is both in Russia. So the lowest point is Caspian Sea. Yeah, so that makes things somewhat interesting. Right now might be one to keep for later. Lowest point is the Caspian Sea. Highest point is Elbrus. So a lot of people don't think of Russia as Europe, but half of it is, or about a third of it is. Mount Elbrus at about 5,600 meters. And Antarctica, the highest point is Mount Vincent. And the lowest point has been quite hard to research, actually, because so much of Antarctica has not been mapped. So I think I'm on the right track of where it is, but that one may require a bit more research and consultation. Oceania, very interesting one, the lowest point is Lake Eyre in South Australia, and the highest point is on West Papua, so an entirely different landmass. And so that is going to present some interesting challenges, to say the least.
Those were much worse than I thought they'd be.
Oh yeah,
I don't know what I was expecting.
They're pretty bad.
They're pretty bad. That's one way of saying it. But what an absolutely phenomenal way of interacting with all 7 continents, because you get the highs and lows. Good one, Fergus. Along with the enormous variation in climate that can come with a lot of these places, which is a very, very unique experience. And again, you're not going to bump into anyone at the local that has the same stories to tell at the back end of this. Yeah. If it's not rude of me to ask, how much is this going to cost?
Several £100,000.
I assumed as much. Yeah. I was wondering whether we were dipping into 7 figures or not.
Could nudge towards 7 figures quite easily.
Yeah, that's what I was expecting. Because are you documenting it in a high level way as well? What's the sort of team dynamic and logistics to consider?
So at an absolute minimum, I will be documenting it, although conversations are ongoing with a number of TV production companies. So yeah, that's a possibility without talking too much on that. But absolute minimum, I will be documenting as much as I possibly can.
Is your brief just get what you can and we'll piece it together at the back end? hypothetical TV company that we can't refer to.
Yeah, that's one way we could do things. Yeah, that's one way we could do things. So I mean, what I would like to achieve is to have film crew with me, because knowing what I know from my experiences so far, expeditions, journeys like this just present the most interesting, unpredictable moments, and it's with a crew that you can really capture that. So that is the intention somewhere down the line, and it's going to be a building process. I'm intentionally starting with the kind of cheaper, easier expeditions, building it up from there, strategically. And then, very, very pleased to have a couple of big brands on board. L'Ecole, the cycling brand, premium cycling brand, British brand, doing amazing things, really high-end quality cycling gear, support the likes of Bradley Wiggins, Victoria Pendleton. And then I've just today shared news that Canada Goose are coming on board as the mountain clothing sponsor, who are a truly massive global brand and support some of the absolute great explorers and adventurers. So that there's many signs which are sort of showing me the true scope and scale of this project. I know that, but to have brands like Canada Goose put their faith in it, that really backs it up from my point of view.
No, it's a phenomenal project. It's terrifying. My brain goes, oh, can't be arsed as soon as I even start thinking about the logistics. So my hat goes off to you before you even set foot on the plane for even considering to map this out. And I'm sure the Excel spreadsheet is horrifying. Yeah. But nonetheless, there is a lot that is about to unfold. And I think the biggest question that will be on everyone's minds right now is what are you most concerned about?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I could nail it down to specific elements on each leg, but really I will be taking every measure to mitigate risk overall. To put it in context, this is not something I built towards randomly. And so, probably the biggest risk overall is sometimes the people you interact with, and sometimes the officials. I've had more problems with officials overseas. I mean, I mentioned one there, Uzbekistan. There's probably been 10 different countries I've been interrogated, had phones taken, even been questioned by MI5 arriving back in the UK. So that's an element. And being on the road, spending time on the roads, that is a big risk. I'll be taking steps to mitigate that.
Cycling through Africa must be a terrifying thought, and that's next week.
That's next week.
So that must be pretty front of mind.
That's certainly front of mind. I'm lucky to have. Well, I've worked hard to build some very good contacts out there who are going to be helping to make sure it's a smooth journey. But yeah, Africa is certainly not without its risks. I've spent a lot of time there. We've had some interesting situations in the past, but I feel as well positioned as ever to go and take on this challenge.
Fantastic. I'm very excited. I paused on using the word excited because I don't feel it's doing it justice. I'm if there was a blend of excited and curious, and also kind of existentially fascinated by just the journey you're going to go on. You will see the world in a way that nobody has ever seen it before, and that's pretty remarkable. I mean, you haven't started yet, to be fair. So my excitement is a bit premature, and you've got lots of time to document it and share these stories as we go. But I am, I'm sort of wandering in my own head at all of the things you're going to experience, because it's not just like you're running from West Coast to East Coast of America where you experience the culture of America in all of its different forms, all of its different states, and then you're done. You are in a multi-year period going to experience the worst of and the best of every continent on the planet, and that is remarkably unique. And going from the lowest point to the highest point gives it a total different narrative that just doing the 7 summits doesn't, which is obviously why you're drawn to this project and why you've spent so many years preparing for it. But yeah, for me sitting here hearing you talk about it, yeah, I'm being a terrible podcast host because my mind's just wandering, thinking, "Good Lord, think of the things you're going to see, the people you're going to have to run away from, and all the things that you're going to have to consider." But for those that wanted to get more insight, because we could deep dive on context for hours and go through the things you're most concerned about in each of the 7 continents, but we won't do that this time round. We'll maybe we can do a follow up conversation when you're a couple of expeditions down. That could be an interesting way of debriefing things. To me. But for people that want to follow along, hear more about what you're up to, hear more about what you've been up to, what is the best place to direct them to?
Yeah, thanks very much, Fergus. So best place, it will be Instagram at Oli France. Come and find me on LinkedIn. Also, really want to do more YouTube stuff. So yeah, come and have a look on YouTube at Oli France. And I will be putting all things Ultimate 7 across all those channels. And please do come and follow along. I can assure you it's going to be some adventure. And appreciate the thoughts on it there, Fergus, as well. It's good to hear somebody else's take on it, and a lot of what.
No, it's otherworldly, but in this world, which is, I mean, I've always been fascinated by the concept of the 7 summits. Personally, I don't know whether I am fascinated enough by Everest to be willing to die on it, and that is essentially the question you need to ask yourself. Maybe I'll have a midlife crisis, and that answer will change. I don't know. That's not me saying you have a midlife crisis, by the way. Just to be clear, but I wrestle with this a lot because it's seeing a world in a way that is truly profound, and you're adding a layer to that, which until I heard about the project you were focusing on, is not even a way that I considered, but does it in such a neat but extensive way that I'm very excited to see it unfold. So I hope that brands keep coming on board. I hope that the big TV production houses that you're talking to give you a clear brief, because trying to get a GoPro out when you're on the Khumbu Icefall, I can imagine it'll be a bit of a pain in the arse.
Yeah, probably be the last thing I want to do. So thanks very much.
No, I very much look forward to seeing things unfold. And the Wild Edge's website as well for there's lots of context on things you've done in the past and stuff there as well. So that'll be linked down below. Yeah. But I wish you all the best. Safe travels. How many hours out from your flight are we? About 36. 36. Fantastic. Yeah, well, I feel privileged to... Do you have any other podcast recordings before you go?
No, I don't. This is the last one, so...
Excellent. I'll lean into that very aggressively. Thank you very much. We've had a few technical difficulties that we've navigated, but you're a man who has navigated much more significant difficulties in the past, so we've made it work. But have a good evening. Thank you again, and best of luck with everything to come.
Thanks so much, Fergus. Lovely conversation.